I backed into the driveway without thinking. That's the thing about muscle memory. After 38 years of driving up to that cabin, my hands just turned the wheel before my brain caught up. It was a Tuesday, early October, the kind of morning where the fog sits low over the Smokies and everything smells like wet pine and cold air. I'd driven up from Knoxville the night before to meet a guy about restaining the back deck before winter set in. He'd texted that morning. Something came up, can we reschedule Thursday? And I'd said fine. Turned around to head back down the mountain. Then I remembered I'd left my medication on the kitchen counter. I have a small condition with my heart. Nothing dramatic, just a pill I take every morning, and my cardiologist is very specific about consistency, so I turned back around. That's when I saw the car. A silver Audi, parked sideways across the gravel lot like whoever drove it wasn't planning on staying long or wasn't thinking clearly when they pulled in. I didn't recognize it. My son drives a black pickup. My daughter lives in Portland. The only people who use that cabin are family, and even then they asked me first. I sat in my truck for a moment with the engine idling. The cabin had belonged to my wife, Beverly. Her father built it in 1971, up in the hills outside Gatlinburg, Tennessee. When he passed, she inherited it. When she passed 11 years ago, pancreatic cancer, 7 weeks from diagnosis to the end, it came to me. I've kept it up ever since. New roof in 2019, replaced the water heater last spring. It's not much, maybe 1,200 square feet, but Beverly loved that place more than anywhere on earth. She used to say the mountains made her feel like the world had stopped rushing. I sat there looking at that silver Audi, and something felt wrong. I got out of the truck. The gravel crunched under my boots. I walked toward the porch slowly, the way you walk when part of you already knows what you're about to find, and another part of you is still arguing against it. I heard a voice through the screen door, a woman's voice, low and laughing, then a man's voice I didn't recognize. I stood on the porch steps and I did something I'm not proud of. I listened. For almost 2 full minutes I stood there and I listened. Then I opened the door. My daughter-in-law was sitting on the kitchen counter in my wife's kitchen, in my wife's cabin, with a man who was not my son. She was in her early 30s, dark hair, the kind of woman you'd call put together, always dressed right, always said the right things at Sunday dinner. She'd been married to my son, Miles, for 6 years. They had 2 kids, a boy named Cooper, who was 4, and a girl, Lily, who had just turned 2. The man was standing close to her. Too close. He stepped back when I walked in. He was maybe 40, built like someone who spent time in a gym, wearing a fleece vest over a button-down. I'd never seen him in my life. My daughter-in-law said my name. Just my name. Nothing else. I looked at both of them for a long moment. I didn't raise my voice. Beverly always said that was my one good quality, that I don't raise my voice when I'm angry. I just get quiet. I said, "You need to leave, both of you." The man grabbed his jacket off the back of Beverly's chair, her chair, the one with the worn armrest where she used to read, and he was out the door in under a minute. I heard the Audi start. I heard the gravel spray. My daughter-in-law didn't move off the counter. She said she could explain. I told her she didn't need to. She said it wasn't what it looked like. I said it was exactly what it looked like. She slid down off the counter then, and I noticed she was barefoot, and for some reason that detail hit me harder than anything else. Standing barefoot in Beverly's kitchen like she lived there. She started crying. I handed her a dish towel. I'm from a generation where you hand someone something when they cry because you don't know what else to do. Then she said something that changed the temperature of the room. She said, "Please don't tell Miles. The kids need a stable home." And I thought about my son. Miles works construction management. He's up at 5 every morning, on a job site by 6:30, home by 7 if he's lucky. He coaches Cooper's soccer on Saturdays. He calls me every Sunday. He is, without question, the person in this family who has worked the hardest and asked for the least. I looked at my daughter-in-law for a long moment. Then I picked up my medication from the counter, which was the reason I'd come back in the first place, and I walked out. I sat in my truck at the end of the driveway for about 10 minutes. I had 3 questions turning over in my mind, and I kept coming back to them the whole drive down the mountain. First, who was that man? I hadn't recognized him, but she wasn't reckless enough to bring a stranger to a private family cabin 2 hours outside the city. She knew him. She'd been here before with him. I was certain of that. Second, how long had this been going on? Because the way they were standing when I walked in, the ease of it, the casualness, that wasn't new. You don't stand like that with someone the first time, or the 5th time. You stand like that when you got uncomfortable, when you've stopped being careful. Third, how do you tell your son that his wife has been doing this in the place where his mother used to read on Sunday mornings? I didn't have an answer to the third one. Not yet. I drove back to Knoxville and I sat in my house and I didn't call anyone. I made coffee. I watched the news. I went to bed early and I stared at the ceiling for about 3 hours before I finally fell asleep. The next morning, I called my friend Darnell. Darnell and I go back 40 years. We worked together at the same civil engineering firm for the better part of 2 decades, and he retired 2 years before I did. After his wife passed, he started doing private investigative work, not as a business exactly, just as something to keep him occupied. He's licensed in Tennessee. I'd never had a reason to ask him for anything like this before. I told him what I'd seen. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You want to know who he is?" I said yes. I gave him the description. 40-ish, maybe 6 feet, sandy hair going grey at the temples, driving a silver Audi. He said he'd start with the property and vehicle angle. If that car had been at my cabin before, there might be something on the road camera at the base of the mountain road. The county had installed them 2 years ago for traffic monitoring purposes. Darnell knew a few people. He called me back in 4 days. The man's name was Preston. He was 43 years old, a sales director at a medical device company based in Nashville. He had a wife named Sandra and a daughter in middle school. He and my daughter-in-law had, based on what Darnell could piece together, been seeing each other for somewhere between 18 months and 2 years. The silver Audi had appeared on that mountain road camera 6 times over the past 14 months. 6 times. My son had been working long days on a project in Chattanooga for the past 1.5 years, driving down Monday morning and coming home Friday evening. I hadn't put that together until right then. Darnell also told me something else. He'd done some checking. The kind of careful, legal checking he knows how to do. And it appeared that money had been moving out of my son and daughter-in-law's joint account in ways that didn't line up with household expenses. Not enormous amounts. A few hundred here, 400 there. Over 18 months, it added up to just over $9,000. I asked Darnell how confident he was about the money. He said, confident enough. I thanked him. I sat with that information for 2 more days. I thought about Miles. I thought about Cooper at Saturday soccer practice. I thought about little Lily, who had Beverly's forehead, which I noticed the first time I held her at the hospital, and had to excuse myself to the hallway for a minute. I thought about what Beverly would have done. Beverly was practical. She didn't catastrophize and she didn't delay. She'd have said, the longer you wait, the more damage is done. She'd have also said, you don't have the right to make this decision for him. He's not a child. She was right on both counts. I drove to Chattanooga on a Thursday evening. Miles was staying in a company-arranged extended stay hotel near the job site. I called him when I was 40 minutes out and told him I was coming, that I needed to talk to him in person, that it was important. He met me in the lobby looking tired in the way construction people look tired. Not just sleepy, but worn through, like the fatigue has settled into the joints. He asked me if I was okay. That was the first thing out of his mouth. Was I okay? Was it my heart? I told him I was fine. I told him to sit down. I don't remember exactly how I said it. I'd rehearsed it in the car, and then forgot all the rehearsed parts the moment I saw his face. I think I started by telling him about going back for my medication. I think I said, when I walked in, "Your wife was not alone," and I kept talking so he wouldn't have to say anything yet. I told him who the man was. I told him about Darnell. I showed him the photographs Darnell had taken. Nothing explicit, just the two of them at a restaurant in Nashville, leaving together, things that told the story clearly enough, without telling it in a way that couldn't be unseen. I told him about the money. Miles didn't say anything for a long time. He's like me in that way. He goes quiet. Then he said, "How long have you known?" I told him 2 weeks. He nodded slowly, the way you nod when you're not really nodding, just processing. He said, "Did she know you were going to tell me?" I said I hadn't spoken to her since that morning in the cabin. He put his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor. He was quiet for a long time. I didn't say anything. There's nothing you can say to your son in a moment like that. You just stay in the room. Finally, he looked up and said, "I need to call a lawyer before I say anything to her. Will you help me think through this?" That was Miles. Even in the worst moment of his adult life, he was thinking ahead. We talked for 3 hours that night. I stayed in a hotel nearby, but before I drove to that hotel, I did something that I'd been turning over in my mind since the moment Darnell told me Preston's name. I called his wife. I know there are people who would say that wasn't my place. I've thought about it 100 times since then, and I've landed in the same spot every time. She had a right to know. She had a daughter. She had a life built around a version of her marriage that wasn't real. She deserved to make her own choices with accurate information. That's all. I didn't call her with anger. I called her like I'd call someone to deliver difficult news, which is exactly what it was. I told her my name. I told her I was sorry to be making this call. I told her what I'd seen and what Darnell had found, and I offered to send her the documentation if she wanted it. She was very quiet on the phone. Before she hung up, she said, "Thank you for calling me. I think I already knew." I've thought about those words many times since then. Miles retained a family law attorney in Knoxville within a week. The attorney was experienced with cases involving financial misconduct within a marriage. The money that had been redirected from the joint account became relevant to the divorce proceedings in ways I hadn't anticipated. In Tennessee, marital waste of that kind can factor into asset division. My daughter-in-law hired her own attorney. There were several weeks of back and forth that I was only partially aware of. Miles updated me when he felt like it, and I didn't push for more than he wanted to share. He was protective of the process in a way that reminded me of Beverly. She hated when people rushed grief or forced resolution. Miles was grieving in his way. He needed to move through it at his own speed. The part that was hardest, harder than any of the legal pieces, was the children. Cooper and Lily stayed with Miles during the week at my daughter-in-law's parents' house initially. It was the arrangement both attorneys agreed to while things were being sorted. Miles moved back to Knoxville permanently after the Chattanooga project ended. I watched him set up a 2-bedroom apartment. Cooper's room with a soccer ball comforter set. Lily's room painted the soft yellow she pointed at in a paint chip display at the hardware store. I came over and helped him assemble the furniture. We didn't talk much. We just built the furniture. The divorce was finalized 7 months after that morning. I walked into my cabin for my medication. The custody agreement gave Miles primary physical custody. My daughter-in-law has scheduled visitation, the terms of which include supervision during the initial period, given concerns raised about her judgment and the financial issues. Her attorney argued hard against that. Miles's attorney had the documentation. I understand why some people would say that's too harsh. I've read that argument and I've sat with it. but I keep coming back to this. Cooper is 4 years old and Lily is 2. Those are very young children. The adults in their lives have a responsibility to be certain before they aren't certain. Supervised visitation isn't permanent. It's a starting point while trust is being rebuilt, or not rebuilt, as the case may be. I don't hate my daughter-in-law. I want to be clear about that. I think she made a very serious choice, and then she made it again and again for 18 months, and when she was caught, her first instinct was to ask me to protect her from the consequences. That's not something I was willing to do. But I don't hate her. She's still the mother of my grandchildren, and I hope that someday she does the work required to be the mother they deserve. Preston and Sandra separated, from what I understand. I don't know more than that, and I don't look for more. Miles is doing okay. That's probably the most honest way to put it. He's not thriving yet, but he's not breaking either. He coaches Cooper's soccer on Saturdays. He calls me on Sundays. He started running in the mornings, which is something he never did before. He looks tired in a different way now. Not the worn-through exhaustion of too many long days, but the quieter kind that comes after something has ended and you're not sure yet what comes next. Lily asked me last month why she has 2 bedrooms now. I told her some families have more than one home to love in. She thought about that for a second and then asked if we could have waffles, which is a 4-year-old's way of deciding a conversation is over. I said yes. We had waffles. I went back to the cabin for the first time since that October morning about 2 months ago. It was February, cold and grey. I still on the steps. I had the deck contractor meet me there, the same guy who'd postponed that first time, which is the only reason I'd driven back up and forgotten my medication and walked in and changed everything. I stood in Beverly's kitchen for a while after he left. I thought about her standing there making coffee on Sunday mornings, the way she'd hum something tuneless while she waited for the pot to finish. I thought about how she'd prop a paperback on the windowsill above the sink. I thought about how much she would have loved Cooper and Lily and how unfair it is that she never got to meet them. I thought about all of it. Then I put a pot of coffee on, because the morning was cold and it was a long drive back down the mountain. I sat on the back porch with a mug and watched the fog lifting off the ridge. It's the thing Beverly loved most about that view. She always said the fog made the mountains look like they were breathing. I hadn't been able to see it that way since she died. Every time I looked at that ridge, I just felt the absence of her, the negative space where she used to stand. That morning, for the first time in a long time, I looked at the mountains breathing, and I thought she would have known exactly what to do, and I had done my best to do what she would have done. That was enough. I drove back down to Knoxville. I called Miles. He was at the park with the kids. I could hear Cooper shouting something in the background. The way 4-year-olds shout. Like volume is the point. Miles said, "Hey Dad, you doing okay?" I said yes. I told him I'd been up at the cabin. He said, "How'd it look?" I told him the deck was going to need a full restain come spring, but other than that, it was holding up fine. He said, "Good. Maybe we take the kids up there this summer, if that's all right with you." I said that sounded like exactly the right thing to do. I've had a lot of time to think about what happened. More time than I expected, honestly. I thought once the legal part was over and Miles was settled, I'd put it down and move on the way you move on from most hard things. Slowly, quietly, without a lot of ceremony. But it doesn't quite work like that. Some things stay with you not because they haunt you, but because they teach you something you didn't know you needed to learn. What I keep coming back to is this. Every choice has a shape. You don't always see it right away. My daughter-in-law made her choice, and then she made it again and again for 1.5 years. Each time, the shape of that choice got bigger. It spread. It touched Miles. It touched the kids. It touched Preston's wife and daughter. It touched me. By the time I walked into that cabin, the shape of her choices had grown large enough that I couldn't step around it. None of us could. That's not punishment. That's just how it works. Actions accumulate. Patterns compound. The 18 months of deception didn't stay contained. It never does. And the $9,000 quietly disappearing from the joint account, a few hundred at a time, told a story about judgment that no attorney needed to translate for the judge. I think about Preston's wife sometimes, the woman who said, "I think I already knew." There's a particular kind of exhaustion in that sentence. The exhaustion of someone who had been doing the work of not knowing for a long time. When I called her, I wasn't delivering a surprise. I was giving her permission to stop pretending. That took its own kind of courage on her part, to hear it, accept it, and decide to act on it rather than go back to the comfortable lie. I respect that more than I can say. And Miles, what Miles did in that hotel lobby in Chattanooga, sitting with the worst news of his adult life and then saying, "I need to call a lawyer before I say anything," that is what I'd call intelligence under pressure. Not the book kind. The kind that comes from character. He didn't rage. He didn't collapse. He thought forward. He protected his children first, his pride second. That's not something you're born with. That's something you're born, slowly, through years of getting up early and doing the work and keeping your word. I didn't protect him from the pain. I couldn't, and I wouldn't have even if I could. Pain is information. It tells you where the damage is so you know what needs to heal. What I could do was make sure he had the truth, the whole truth, early enough to make real decisions. That's the only thing a parent can offer an adult child in a moment like that. Not rescue. Honesty. Beverly would have done the same. I'm sure of that now. In a way, I wasn't sure of anything in those first 2 weeks. She was practical, and she was honest, and she believed that the people you love deserve accurate information about their own lives. That belief cost something in this case. It cost comfort and ease and the quiet life I had before that October morning. I'd pay it again. The cabin is still standing. The deck got restained last spring, came out looking better than it has in years. Miles and the kids came up in July. Cooper caught his first fish off the back dock and screamed loud enough that I think they heard him in the next county. Lily fell asleep on the porch swing in the afternoon sun. I sat in Beverly's chair and watched them and thought, this is what you protect, not the peace, not the comfortable version of things, the real thing, whatever shape it comes in.